guys, I'm Amy and I teach French and German here at the Academy. They've asked me to come on the podcast, which I'm absolutely delighted about, to have a bit of a chat with you about doing French at leaving cert. So I suppose we're going to break down the paper a bit. We'll look at the benefits of studying French, why you would, or what you can get out of studying French. I suppose things that you might have heard are really difficult about the paper and things that I can hopefully reassure you a bit about. And I suppose at the beginning of the year then, what you can do to make, like you could obviously be in 5th or 6th year, to what you can do to make the 2 years ahead of you or the year going into the exam work a bit more for you, make them a bit easier, make it a bit more, I suppose, productive. So that at the end of the year, you're like, grand, I'm so ready to go and smash this exam. I know exactly what I'm doing because I've been really, really organised from the beginning. So I suppose the first question is, what are the benefits of studying French? And I think, obviously, like a lot of people say, well, I have to. But if you get outside of I'm doing this because I have to and think, okay, well, what can I get out of this subject just in general? It really opens you up to being able to use French, beyond school, and more than just sitting down and writing a diary entry and an opinion piece. You can use it to actually go places. And I know that that's really easy for me to say as a language teacher. Like, obviously you can teach, but with French in particular and with languages in general, I think what's really nice is there are so many, especially nowadays, so many job opportunities with languages. Especially, I suppose, then as well, the benefit you have is that you are native English speakers. For the most part, I would imagine English is your first language. And it doesn't often happen that a native English speaker will speak more than one language. It's not something that we push very much. So if you're kind of like, okay, I'm not really sure, am I just going to power through these 2 years and then just be happy that the exam is done? It's something that you can really bear in mind. Like, yes, it's something that you will have in the job kind of, whatever field you decide to go into, it will give you an edge above everyone else. It's also something that's offered with a lot of courses nowadays. And I think as we kind of move around a bit more, and as like I kind of went away during college, obviously I did languages, so I went on Erasmus, and it was amazing to have language to get more out of that year. And then I moved away as well after I finished my first degree and worked abroad for a while. And again, I wouldn't have had that opportunity without speaking languages. So if you're like, wow, I would love to see a bit more of the world, I would love to move around a bit, I would love to basically just get those experiences that you get from having languages, then it's something that's really, really, I think personally, obviously, and I'll push that always, it's really important to keep up. I know as well, like nowadays, a lot of people are like, God, I'd love to kind of, work within the EU, and like young people are a lot more political. So if you want to work in the EU, there are 3 official languages. You have to speak 2 of them. So you have to have 2 of English, French, and German. So obviously I've got all 3 because that was something I decided to do when I was doing my degree. But having French is something that with the English then enables you to do that. You can't even apply for a job within the EU without having 2 of those 3 languages. So even before you sit down to study, even before you open a book, I think it's really, really important or really good to know that this can take you somewhere. It's not like, a lot of students go, I'm doing the sciences because I want to be a doctor. I'm doing art because I want to go on and study fashion, or something like that. I'm doing English because I want to do that in college. A lot of people go, I'm just doing this because I have to. So again, I think straight away what's really important and what I try to kind of impart on my students is that learning languages is a journey. It can be really kind of one of those ones where you don't get the instant gratification because it's a bit of a process, but it's something that can take you really, really far, even after finishing the Leaving Cert. Okay, so obviously now it brings us to the Leaving Cert. That is a paper you have to sit before you can go anywhere with French. And in grinds, I'll often say, okay, so, do you know what the marking scheme looks like for this? Or do you know when this part of the exam happens? And a lot of my students say, actually, no, I have no idea. So I think it's really, really important that we take a look at what exactly is expected of you. Like, how are you going to do really well in French if you haven't, from the beginning, sat down and go, okay, this is what I need to do. This is when it happens. So the exam for French is broken down. And obviously this kind of goes for other languages as well. Broken down into 4 components. You have the speaking exam, you have your reading comprehension, you have your written work, and then you have the listening. So that's your 4 main competencies within language. Speaking, reading, writing, listening. So you have your oral, which will happen around Easter. I think in 2022, Easter is fairly late. So I would imagine that the oral will happen before the Easter holidays. So that's 25% of your exam. It's kind of between 9 and 12 minutes. It's just a conversation. I think the difference then, if you do more than one language between French, is that it's much less structured than other orals. Okay, so it is very much you are in charge, you are the person leading that. So and I know I'll kind of talk to you in a few minutes about how you can really make sure that you are planning your year so that you get the most out of it. And I suppose the mistakes to avoid, we say mistakes, once you're practicing a language, you're not making mistakes, and making mistakes is what makes you better. But in terms of getting yourself organized, but you have your oral around Easter, that's 25%. After that, then we know we have the written paper is usually kind of on that second Wednesday of the exam. So I think in 2022, it's the 15th of June, which is my birthday. You can all think of me while you do your exam. Thank you so much. And that's 55% of your grade. Okay, now we know that this year, there's going to be some kind of adjustment to allow for the time that you missed in 5th year. Obviously that's for year 6, you're doing the exam. They have said, and obviously nothing is ever set in stone, but they've said that it will be kind of like the original adjustments we made with the papers, so that you'll have your 2 comprehensions worth 60 marks each. That's 120 marks, that's 30% of your paper. That's standard, that's how it always is. And that this year, so 2022 only, it is looking like you'll answer 2 written questions. One question 1, which we always have to do, which should be 60 marks, okay? And then that's 15%. And then the question 1 is 60 marks, and that is 15%. And then you'll answer 1 more question. So that might be your diary entry, that might be your opinion piece, that might be your letter or email. That will be worth 40 marks, and that's 10% of your overall grade. So there you have your 55%. Traditionally speaking, the paper would be broken down into 2 comprehensions worth 60 marks each. That's 120 marks, 30%. And then you would have 3 written questions. So you have your question 1, your obligatory question, which is traditionally worth 40 marks. And then you would answer 2 more questions worth 30 marks each. So that's, your diary entry or your opinion piece or your letter, but normally you would have to do 2 of them. And then after that, and I think I really push it with my students, because you hear the horror stories of someone like leaving because they forget. When you finish your written exam, 10 minutes after it finishes, you have your oral, okay? So it's not like, I know for Irish for the Leaving Cert, you do the listening first and then you do your written paper. You have to remember to come back. That's 20%, it's 80 marks. And again, I think what's really important, again, as I'll talk about it as we go through kind of what you should be looking at the beginning of the year, make sure you're practicing those, because it's the same kind of weird vocab, it's the same structure. It gets you used to listening to, how many times they play it, where kind of, you listen out for the break and you go, okay, that means the answer is before this, and all of this kind of stuff. So that is basically everything you will need to do this year, or, if you're in 6th year, everything that you'll have for French. So we start off with the oral, and I know that is something that students get really, really stressed out about. Okay. And I know that is something that students think they have to be perfect for. They think they have to be able to talk like a French person. They think they have to know the word for every single thing. And I suppose that, coupled with the fear of grammar that a lot of students have. Like, I say to my students all the time, I am a massive loser, and the only interest that I have in my life is grammar. And I know what that sounds like. I do know that. But I think if you can kind of, at this end of the year, and this kind of ties in quite nicely to the advice I would give you for this year, if you can kind of look at, okay, it's the beginning of the year, I'm going to make sure that first of all, I practice for the oral, okay, that I'm speaking all the time, that I am just going over the verbs until I could say them backwards in my sleep. That is where you're going to do really, really well. So if I'm giving you, I guess, advice for French and what you should be doing at this point, I think at the beginning of the year, it's really, really important to make sure that you know your verbs, okay? We have our big 4, we have avoir, être, aller, faire. Know them in every tense, every single tense. You won't use them in every single tense, but you have to know them, okay? I suppose making sure that like, if you're like, I want to be able to say this in your oral, like I say for the oral, the best way to do well is have your 3 Ps. So you've got plan, prepare, and preempt. So you want to plan what you're going to say. You want to prepare really, really strong vocab for that, really, really nice expressions. And then you want to preempt the questions that you might get on that. And I think within that, that's where a really strong oral lies. And I say it all the time as well. I think it would be about 2 years now. And I don't know if I've ever taught you, I'm like, oh, please get a new story. But I went in and I did a mock oral with a 6th year who absolutely blew me away. And I've never had the experience of sitting down with someone who did that well just on the fly. And at the end, I was like, what did you do to prepare for that? Because I can maybe take off 1 mark or 2 marks just to give you an area to improve. And she was like, I was off sick and all I did was learn verbs. She was like, I just learned them. I sat down, I made sure they came out right, that everything sounded natural when I was saying it. And every sentence that she said, every answer that she gave me was just absolutely immaculate. So even though it's not the most interesting part of language, and even though I've talked about how interesting it can be and how much fun you can have with language, to get that foundation really, really strong, you need to make sure that you know your verbs, okay? And also when to use each tense. I suppose with that as well, a lot of the students not ignore the fact, I just don't think we highlight the fact that the comprehensions are worth quite a lot of marks. So I've got the reading comprehensions and the listening comprehension, and together that's 50% of your grade. So if you're not working on those, like we spend ages practicing for the oral, we spend ages practicing for the written pieces, like students will get super stressed about essays. But that's only 50% of your grade. That's only what you should only be spending half of your time on that. So half of your time should be spent on comprehensions. And I think that, like, I hate to be the person, I have like a Quizlet that has all of the vocab from it, but that is a tool that you should be using all of the time. It's just as well on Quizlet MS. And I think going through the words, making sure that you know, like even, give it a practice when you're doing the comprehension, go, I didn't know these 50 words. And the first time you do it, it probably will be 50 words that you don't know. And I always talk about trust the process, and language learning is a process, and languages are alive, and you have to kind of learn to commit that to memory. And it's like when you learn a new word for something and you go, oh, I actually really like the way that sounds. And you find yourself using it like ironically at first. And then after a while you're using the word unironically. That's the process of how you are actually learning French as well. So like try and bring in a new word, try and use it. Like you find a new word in your comprehension, try and use it in a written piece, try and use it in your oral. And then one day it will just be part of the vocab that you use. I suppose that's a lot of me just like talking, like pontificating at you on how to study languages. But, by learning that vocab, by doing the comprehensions that actually come up in the exams, you're going to just be prepping yourself for doing well in the actual exam. You know what I mean? Like preparation is so key with the Leaving Cert because of how structured everything is. And I think I've saved it for last because it's the first thing that we'll see, or, in terms of exams. So it makes sense for us to kind of chat about it now. But the oral gets students so stressed. Like they really do be just absolutely losing their minds about it. And I suppose you go in, it's not like you go in with 100 and the examiner is trying to take marks off you. You go in with nothing, and everything you do right, the examiner can bring you up from there. So you are rewarded for doing well rather than penalized for doing badly, if that makes sense. And I think that's something that's really important to try and remember as you study. With that as well, I kind of turn around. I would imagine now it's at this point, most of you will have done a CBA. And I always say in class, everyone goes, nah, hardly. I stood up and just did that on the day. But in terms of a presentation, like you would never go, yeah, I'm going to talk about this and not have something prepped. And it's exactly the same for the oral. You wouldn't go in and sit down for 10 minutes and not have kind of an idea of what you want to talk about. So at this end of the year, what you can be doing is looking for, like we're kind of, like I said, halfway through, I think this comes at the beginning of October, halfway through the first term. So look for like a topic for your document. Like don't pick that last minute and go, actually, I'm going to do one. That's perfect. Plan it now so that by the time the oral comes around, you are like, I am so prepared for this, okay? If you find a nice expression or a nice word in a comprehension, like overlapping your vocab makes your life so much easier. And I know it sounds so lame, and I know you're going to hear it and be like, I'm hardly doing that. But like, take a recording of you saying something out loud, like record you talking about, like, break it down into segments. Moi-même, ma famille, ma maison, mon quartier, and all of that, and just record what you're saying and then listen to it back, because that is the quickest way for you to go, oh, I actually don't like the way I do that, or I must work on pronouncing like the or sound, or like a lot of feedback is like, that kind of really, really, like it can be like très, can be quite hard for people to say. So if you're starting from the very beginning practicing that, okay, that's something I'm going to work on from right now. And it's all about being prepared. So I think, what you really don't want to be doing is learning essays off and learning massive kind of long spiels for the oral, because the examiner will hear that straight away and they'll go, absolutely not, I'm putting a stop to this right now. And you'll get kind of a question to interrupt your flow. And again, kind of just to remember, if you do get that, and I'll talk about this more when we kind of look at the oral, you're not in trouble. They're not asking you a hard question to trip you up. They're just making sure that you haven't learned off all your answers, basically. So that's really it. Like that's a look at French. That's kind of where it can take you, and what at this point we should be looking at. I think at this point, all you need to be doing is organizing yourself, starting to look at vocab that comes up really, really often, starting to look at, okay, can I say things out loud? Can I put this sentence together? And if you start with that, kind of moving on, make a really good study plan for that, then by the time you're kind of looking at mocks or, you know, you're getting to the oral, you've had plenty of time to practice, and hopefully it'll take some of that stress off.